Today, we're going to look at some of the events or causes that led to the Revolutionary War. We did this as an activity in class. I'm going to set up a little bit different for you. So just follow along. I'll mainly talk through it, but as I talk through these things, I want you to try to figure out in your mind if it was what type of primary source document it was, and also what in the document made the colonists upset. As we get into this, you guys will figure this out. So the first one, I'm not going to read through it all. I would encourage you guys to pause it here and to read through it all. One thing you will notice, though, I've underlined some keywords, and you'll notice all these keywords are different types of products: sugars, wines, silks, calico, cloth, sugars again, etc. Then you'll also notice this. This may not be familiar. This says 1 pound, 2 shillings. In Britain, they don't use dollars and cents. They use pounds and shillings. So what this document was a government document. Obviously, it was written. This was written by the British government. And in this document, what they're telling the colonists is that they're going to raise taxes on those things. The reason they're going to raise taxes on those things is because Britain was in debt from the war and they need to pay off their debt. As you guys know, wars are expensive. You have to pay for the soldiers, you have to pay their salaries, you have to pay for their uniforms, their food, their weapons, etc. So at the end of the 7-Year War with the French against the French and the Native Americans, Britain owes a lot of money, millions of dollars. And the government decides we're going to pay off that debt by raising taxes. And some of the things, sugar, tea, paper, and the other things listed. This obviously didn't please the colonists. Cause number 2, again, you look at this, you know right away that this is a painting. You may have seen this painting before. This is a famous painting from this time period. Anyway, on the right-hand side where you see my cursor, we see British soldiers. I know they're soldiers because they have weapons. They have uniforms. Also, back then, the British uniform, their jackets were red. Soldiers were often referred to as redcoats. And they're firing their weapons. That's why we see the smoke. And we see colonists over to the left, and you can tell very clearly some of them have been shot and they're bleeding and perhaps even dead. As mentioned, this is a painting. This is a painting of the Boston Massacre. This is 1760s, and British soldiers fire into a crowd of colonists in Boston, killing 5. That painting, I don't want to talk about too much, probably isn't completely historically accurate. If you go back to it, you'll notice that the colonists look completely innocent. They're just standing there. They're away from the British troops. They don't have any weapons. In reality, the scene was a lot different. Paul Revere gets credit for this, and this was printed in every major newspaper in the 13 colonies. So when other colonists saw this, they believed it, and they think the British are solely to blame. But that crowd that day, the colonists, there were hundreds of them. They were taunting the British soldiers. Some of them had weapons, not guns, but they had rocks they were throwing, they had sticks they were throwing, etc. So the painting isn't exactly as it seems in real life. Here's another painting I put on here. This one maybe is a little bit more realistic. And this one you can see the colonists over here. You can see they have weapons. This man right here is attempting to take the gun. There's stuff flying through the air. Another aspect of this is the colonists have the soldiers surrounded. I'm not saying the soldiers were completely innocent in this, but I don't think in the first painting the colonists were completely innocent either. There's a side-by-side if you want to compare and contrast. Okay, skip this. Don't worry about this. Here's the next one. And I'm just going to read this line. It says, if taxes are laid upon us in any shape without our having a legal representation where they are laid, and then he continues on. Feel free to pause that and read it all. This was a letter, most likely. Could have been a speech, but I'm pretty sure it was a letter from Sam Adams. Sam Adams, maybe you haven't heard from him. You've probably heard of his brother. His brother was John Adams, the second president. But Sam Adams was a pretty well-known person back there. I think we could call him a founding father, but he was leading a lot of this early stuff against the British. Anyway, he writes in this letter that the colonists are upset because of this phrase, which says no taxation without representation. You may have heard this before. If you haven't, no big deal. I'm going to explain what it means. What this means is Sam Adams and the colonists are arguing that Britain did not have the right to tax colonists because they were not represented in Parliament. So let me explain this. Cause number one was Britain kept raising taxes. The colonists weren't happy about the taxes. But to add to that, they had to pay these taxes, but they didn't get represented in Parliament. Let me explain this. Parliament, and I put this on here, was Britain's version of Congress. So as you guys know, Britain had a king, King George III. You become a king by being born into it. However, they had this other group of people called Parliament, and these people were elected. And they went to Parliament, and they represented the people that elected them, and they helped pass laws, like tax laws. Back to the colonists. The colonists, because they lived in the 13 colonies and not Britain itself, they weren't able to vote for representatives to go to Parliament on their behalf. So therefore, their argument was, because you're not giving us representatives in Parliament, you shouldn't be able to tax us. No taxation without representation. Ignore that for now. Sorry. Here's the fourth one. Another piece of artwork. I think it's hard to tell if it's a painting or a drawing. It's artwork for sure. This one, more importantly, I don't know if what we see in here made the colonists mad, but this is a picture of, or an image of the Boston Tea Party, which is one of the most famous stories in early American history. So I put down artwork, drawing, painting. We can argue over it. It doesn't really matter. So the Boston Tea Party, again, was taxes. What happened is the British were passing all these taxes. A lot of times they would pass these taxes, and the colonists would complain to the king in Parliament, and eventually the king would get rid of those tax laws. One tax law he never got rid of was the tea tax. And the colonists were really upset about this because if there's one thing they loved in life, it was tea. They drank it every single day, so they were buying it frequently. They had to pay these taxes on it. So to protest what they did, and the painting clearly shows it, you know the story, a group of them dress up as Native Americans. They sneak onto a couple ships that were parked in Boston Harbor, and they proceed to dump hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds of tea into Boston Harbor, ruining it. I don't remember the exact amount, but it wasn't just a little bit of tea. It was somewhere in the neighborhood, if I'm remembering right, of $2 to $3 million worth of tea. So this ended up being a pretty big deal and was another event that slowly was causing the colonies